Over 99% of human history unfolded before the invention of writing. Entire civilizations rose and fell, their stories told in languages that are now completely silent. This video will show you how we are finally learning to listen to those lost voices. We will reveal how cutting-edge technology is decoding the words of our deepest ancestors, and you will discover what their language reveals about migration, culture, and the human mind itself. How did the very first human words sound? Can we ever truly reconstruct a conversation from 10,000 years ago? By the end, your understanding of human history will be permanently transformed. What forgotten story do you hope we might one day hear? That fundamental challenge of studying a silent world is where our real journey begins. Think of the prehistoric era as a vast, unrecorded concert. For tens of thousands of years, the air was filled with a symphony of human voices, each language a unique instrument with its own intricate melody of grammar, its own library of words, and its own rhythmic pulse for storytelling. These were not primitive grunts. They were complex, nuanced systems for sharing knowledge, expressing love, and forging alliances. A mother might sing a lullaby in a tongue we can never hear, or a hunter might describe the path of a migrating herd using words that vanished the moment they were spoken. This was the living, breathing soundscape of prehistory, a world built entirely on the spoken word. The term prehistoric itself simply marks that immense stretch of time before any writing system was invented to capture these voices. This period covers over 99% of our entire history. Languages flourished and disappeared, leaving behind no dictionaries, no stone carvings, no clay tablets. They lived and died with their speakers, so how can we possibly hope to understand them? We become linguistic detectives, piecing together clues from whatever evidence survived the millennia. We study the stone tools and burial sites they left behind, asking what these objects can tell us about the social structures that required complex communication. We meticulously analyze the thousands of languages spoken today, tracing their family trees backward through time in the hope of finding a common ancestral root. We are trying to reconstruct a ghost from its shadow. This mission to decode the lost soundscape forces us to confront the biggest mystery of all, the very spark that started it. Where did human language itself first emerge? That foundational mystery of the first word leads us directly into the heart of a fierce and fascinating debate. Did language slowly evolve, note by note, or did it ignite in a single, brilliant flash of cognitive lightning? On one side, you have the idea of a gradual progression. This theory suggests our earliest ancestors began with a repertoire of simple calls and gestures, much like other primates. Over countless generations, these signals may have grown more complex, blending and refining until they formed the building blocks of true grammar. It is a story of incremental change, a slow burn across the millennia. But another compelling idea proposes the opposite, a sudden leap. This theory posits that a crucial genetic mutation rewired the human brain, granting us an almost magical ability to combine sounds and symbols in an infinite number of new ways. This was not just a new tool, it was a new kind of thought. The influential linguist Noam Chomsky champions a version of this, arguing for an innate, universal grammar hardwired into every human mind. If he is right, then this deep structure is a direct inheritance from that first linguistic Big Bang, a fossil of the mind that shapes every language we speak today. Then there are the more playful yet profoundly human suggestions for how it all started. The bow-wow theory proposes that language began with our ancestors mimicking the sounds of the world around them, the bark of a dog, the rush of a river. The poo-poo theory, on the other hand, suggests our first words were involuntary exclamations, cries of pain, gasps of surprise, or sighs of relief that gradually took on shared meaning. While we will certainly never identify that very first word, whether it was a warning, a name, or a question, the search itself forces us to look at the evidence we do have. We examine the intricate diversity of modern languages, searching for common threads that might point to a single ancestral tongue. We study the fossilized skulls of our hominid cousins, like the Neanderthals, analyzing the shape of their hyoid bone to see if they had the physical capacity for speech. Each clue, whether from genetics, archaeology, or linguistics, is a piece of the puzzle. This grand search for the origin of language is the essential backdrop for the more focused, tangible work of reconstruction. It defines the void we are trying to fill, so we turn to the evidence, to the tangible clues left in the earth. This is where comparative linguistics meets the cold, hard facts of archaeology. The reconstruction of a proto-language like Proto-Indo-European is a brilliant intellectual feat, but it remains a model, a beautiful blueprint for a building that has long since crumbled to dust. To confirm that this blueprint is correct, we need to find its foundations in the real world. We need to connect those reconstructed words to the actual objects and places used by the people who spoke them. This is where archaeology breathes life into the ghost. For example, linguists reconstructed the Proto-Indo-European word for wheel, something like kweklos. This single word acts as a time stamp. If the people who spoke this proto-language had a word for wheel, then they must have existed after the invention of the wheel itself. This narrows down the possible time and place for their culture. Archaeologists then search for the earliest evidence of wheeled vehicles in the hypothesized homeland. When they find it, the linguistic model and the physical evidence lock together, creating a much more confident picture of who these people were and how they lived. The same process works for words for domesticated animals, for specific tools, and for plants. Each reconstructed term is a tiny window into their world, and archaeology helps us peer through it. But words are not the only sounds we can recover from the deep past. Another, even more surprising method allows us to hear the very accent of a long-vanished people. A stone tool is more than just a sharp edge. It is a fossilized thought. The way it was made, the specific steps required to shape it, these actions speak volumes about the mind of its creator. When archaeologists uncover a cache of incredibly standardized Acheulean hand axes, each one virtually identical to the next and dating back over 1 million years, they are not just looking at rocks. They are looking at a curriculum. That level of consistency across vast distances and time does not happen by accident or through simple imitation. It implies a teacher and a student, and a shared vocabulary to explain the precise angle for a flake removal or the correct way to hold the core. This was knowledge being passed down, a technological tradition that almost certainly required some form of instructional language to survive. This is what we call an archaeological correlate, a physical object whose very existence points toward the complex communication needed to create it. We see this same principle in other artifacts. A shell necklace found hundreds of miles from the nearest coast is not just a piece of jewelry. It is the end point of a conversation, evidence of a trade network that required negotiation, established value, and social connection. The movement of such goods across the landscape is impossible without the language to arrange it. And then there is the art. The breathtaking cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet are not merely pictures of animals. They are narratives, the deliberate placement of figures, the recurring symbols, the very act of painting deep underground in total darkness. All of this suggests a symbolic system, a shared understanding of meaning that transcends a simple image. This is a precursor to writing, a language of symbols painted in ochre and charcoal. These artifacts are our silent witnesses. They are the material echoes of conversations that happened tens of thousands of years ago, allowing us to infer the presence of language even if we can never hear its sounds. But to move from inferring language to potentially reconstructing its very sound, we must turn to a different kind of evidence, one written not in stone but in our own flesh and bone. Our own anatomy is a living archive holding the deepest secrets of our first words. To uncover them, we turn to paleoanthropology, the science of reading our evolutionary story from the fossilized bones of our ancestors. This field asks a profoundly simple question. What did our predecessors have the physical equipment to say? The answer lies in the intricate architecture of the skull and spine. Researchers meticulously examine the subtle contours of a fossilized jaw, the delicate curve of the palate, and the size of the canal that once housed the nerves controlling breath. Every exhalation for speech is a precisely coordinated feat, and the evidence for that control is written in bone. Perhaps the most telling clue is a small, horseshoe-shaped bone suspended in the neck, the hyoid. This fragile bone acts as an anchor for the muscles of the tongue and larynx, and its structure is crucial for producing the wide range of sounds in modern speech. The stunning discovery of a Neanderthal hyoid bone, virtually identical to our own, shattered old assumptions. It proved that our ancient cousins possessed the physical foundation for complex vocalization. They had the hardware, but did they have the software? To answer that, scientists look inward, at the impression the brain left on the inside of the skull. These brain endocasts can reveal the faint outlines of key regions like Broca's area, a critical center for language production and grammar. When a fossil skull shows a prominent bulge in that specific location, it is a powerful indication that the brain was organized for language. By piecing together this biological evidence from the hyoid to the brain cavity, we can start to build a timeline. It seems the physical capacity for speech was in place hundreds of thousands of years ago, long before the first known writing. This establishes a pivotal moment in our history, a long prelude where the body was ready, waiting for the spark of symbolic meaning to ignite. That spark leads us from biological capacity to the birth of something entirely new, the first symbolic systems that would eventually give structure to all human thought. That symbolic capacity did not arrive fully formed with complex grammar. It began with a more primal form of communication, a world built on gesture and imitation. Some researchers, like Merlin Donald, propose an entire mimetic culture that laid the foundation for everything that followed. In this world, our ancestors communicated through a rich vocabulary of body language, meaningful grunts, and deliberate reenactments. A hunter might not have had a word for bear, but he could mime its size, its lumbering walk, and the power of its swipe. This was not primitive. It was a sophisticated system of shared understanding that relied on the ability to let one action stand for a whole concept. This mimetic skill is the cognitive bedrock of symbolism itself, the profound mental leap to understand that one thing can represent another, that a red smear of ochre is not just colored dirt, it can represent blood or life or a spiritual connection. That a seashell drilled and hung around the neck is not just an ornament, it can signify status or a memory of a distant shore. The archaeological record suddenly blooms with this evidence. We find lumps of ochre pigment carved with geometric patterns, the oldest beads made from shells and feathers, and abstract engravings on pieces of stone. These artifacts are not language, but they speak the same cognitive language. They are the physical proof of a mind that had learned to symbolize. The transition from this gestural world to the world of the spoken word was a cognitive revolution of staggering proportions. Spoken language was faster, it worked in the dark, it freed the hands, and it allowed for an explosion of complexity. You could now discuss what happened yesterday or plan for a season you have not yet seen. But the old gestural foundation never truly left us. We still use our hands when we talk. We still mime actions to clarify our meaning. That ancient channel of communication is still open. To understand how this symbolic capacity eventually structured entire languages, we look to the most isolated human communities on Earth. Their languages are like living fossils, preserving ancient ways of thinking that the rest of the world has forgotten. Isolation can preserve a voice like amber preserves a fossil. In the remote corners of our world, in places like the dense rainforests of the Andaman Islands or the rugged landscapes of Tasmania, languages have evolved in near total separation for thousands of years. These are not just different dialects, they are living time capsules. When a language develops with so little outside influence, it can hold onto ancient features that were long ago worn away or transformed in the interconnected languages of continents. They are the linguistic equivalent of a deep ocean trench, where life forms from a distant era still survive. By studying them, we are not just learning about a modern culture, we are getting a rare, fragmented glimpse into the deep structures of human communication. The very sounds they use can be a revelation. Some of these languages possess sound systems or phonologies that are startlingly simple, using only a handful of core vowels and consonants. Others are breathtakingly complex with sounds like intricate click consonants that are absent from most other languages. This incredible diversity immediately challenges our comfortable assumptions. We might think that all languages have words for left and right, or that they all have a past and future tense, but these isolated systems often defy such expectations. They prove that the human mind is capable of structuring reality in profoundly different ways. The grammar of one of these languages might bundle concepts together in a single word that would take an entire sentence to express in English. Their vocabularies can be deeply rooted in a specific ecosystem, with dozens of precise words for subtle shifts in wind or the stages of a plant's growth, reflecting a worldview shaped by millennia in one place. These living relics are precious and fragile. Each one that disappears takes with it a unique library of human knowledge and a distinct blueprint of how language can work. They remind us that the story of human speech is not a single narrative moving toward complexity, but a vast, branching tree of possibilities. And just as these languages preserve ancient words, our own bodies carry a different kind of linguistic fossil, one that records an even older journey. Our own DNA holds a map of ancient journeys, and written into that map are clues to the very languages our ancestors spoke. This is the frontier of archaeogenetics, a field that merges the study of ancient genes with the puzzle of human prehistory. The geneticist Luigi Luca Cavalli Sforza was one of the first to see the stunning pattern. He created vast family trees of human populations based on their DNA, and when he placed them next to the family trees of language families, the parallels were uncanny. Again and again, the branches of our genes matched the branches of our words. This was more than a coincidence. It was powerful evidence that when early human populations split and migrated across the globe, they carried their language with them, a cultural heirloom passed down through generations alongside their biological inheritance. A single, powerful example is the spread of the Indo-European languages, which genetic evidence suggests moved out of the Pontic-Caspian steppe alongside the pastoralist people whose descendants we can now identify in ancient DNA. Language, it seems, rode on the waves of human migration, but our genes do more than just track these movements. They also tell us about the very tools required for speech. This brings us to one of the most dramatic discoveries in this field, the so-called language gene known as FOXP2. FOXP2 is not a gene that gives you a vocabulary, it is far more fundamental. It is a regulatory gene, a master switch that helps orchestrate the complex neural circuits in the brain that control the fine motor skills of our face, mouth, and throat. When this gene functions properly, we can perform the incredibly rapid, precise muscular dances required for clear speech. But when it is damaged, the result is a devastating inherited disorder that affects the control of speech muscles and the ability to understand and produce grammar. This single gene provides a clear biological link between our DNA and our capacity for language. It is part of the neurological hardware. By recovering ancient DNA from fossilized bones, scientists can now look at how genes like FOXP2 evolved over time. They can analyze the versions carried by Neanderthals and our other extinct cousins, comparing them to our own. This research provides a kind of molecular clock, helping to establish a timeline for when the modern human capacity for rapid, sophisticated speech finally crystallized. This genetic evidence does not stand alone. It provides a solid chronological framework, a biological scaffold upon which the linguistic reconstructions and archaeological finds can be hung. The words reconstructed by linguists and the tools uncovered by archaeologists now have a potential timeline written in the language of life itself. All of these separate threads, the linguistic, the archaeological, and the genetic, are now being woven together to tackle one of the greatest enigmas of the ancient world. Could a single word spoken by the very first humans still be hiding inside the languages we speak today? This is the extraordinary quest of the Proto-World Hypothesis, a radical idea that dares to suggest all human languages, from English to Japanese to Zulu, ultimately descend from one original mother tongue. Proponents of this theory, like the linguist Joseph Greenberg, embarked on a monumental task comparing thousands of languages across different families to hunt for what they call global etymologies. These are words that look and sound so similar across vastly different and historically separate languages that they seem to point back to a common ancestral source. A famous example is the proposed root for water, something like aqua. You can hear a faint echo of it in the Latin word aqua, and supporters point to similar sounding words in languages from the Americas to Asia, suggesting a primordial thread connecting them all. It is a breathtakingly romantic idea, the notion that we might still carry a tiny fragment of that first human conversation within our everyday speech. Yet this field stands on extremely controversial ground. The central problem is the sheer difficulty of proving that a similarity is not just a coincidence. Over thousands of years, sounds change in predictable ways, but they can also change in bizarre and unexpected ones. Critics argue that a word like aqua could simply be an example of onomatopoeia, mimicking the sound of swallowing or the gurgle of a stream, something that could have independently sprung up in multiple cultures. Or it could be a very old loanword, borrowed and traded between groups so long ago that its trail has been completely erased, making it look like a native root when it is not. The most significant criticism is that after about 8,000 to 10,000 years, the signal of language relationship becomes so distorted by endless changes that it is completely drowned out by noise. The methods that work so well for reconstructing Proto-Indo-European simply break down at such vast time depths. This debate is far more than an academic squabble. It forces us to stare directly into the limits of our own knowledge. How far back can we really see? Is there a point in prehistory where the linguistic trail goes permanently cold, no matter how clever our models become? The grand, unifying search for proto-world stands in stark contrast to a different kind of decipherment, one that focuses its entire energy on a single, silent culture. This approach asks if we can ever hope to understand a people who left behind no written records, but whose world was undoubtedly rich with meaning. The silent symbols of the Indus Valley stand as a permanent monument to our ignorance. This was a civilization of staggering scale, its cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa home to tens of thousands of people, with sophisticated plumbing, standardized weights, and trade routes stretching to Mesopotamia. They left behind over 4,000 inscribed seals, tiny tablets of soapstone carved with elegant, unknown script and images of mythic beasts. We can see their writing, but we cannot hear it. The meaning behind those 400 distinct signs is locked away, and with it the name of their civilization, their stories, their laws, and their prayers. Was their language an ancient ancestor of the Dravidian tongues spoken in southern India today? Or was it something else entirely, a linguistic isolate that bloomed in the Indus Basin and died without leaving a single relative? Without a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone that can bridge the gap between their symbols and a known language, every attempt at decipherment remains a speculative guess. This is the ultimate frustration. Here we have one of humanity's first experiments in urban living, a society complex enough to require record-keeping, and yet its voice is completely lost to us. Their silence is a stark measure of the scale of our loss. If a civilization this vast can vanish without an echo, how many smaller languages, how many unique ways of seeing the world have been extinguished by the tides of time? The silent fate of the Indus Valley is not a relic of some distant, unknowable past. It is a process we can watch unfolding in real time today. Languages are dying all around us, and their deaths offer a heartbreaking window into the great silence of prehistory. Primary engine of this loss is something linguists call language shift. This is the slow, generational process where a community, often under immense pressure, stops speaking its ancestral tongue and adopts a more politically or economically powerful language. You can see it in the aftermath of conquest and colonization, where indigenous children were punished for speaking their mother language in schools designed to erase their culture. You can see it in the relentless tide of globalization, where a young person moves to a city for work and finds that their native dialect holds no value in the new economy. The choice is often not a choice at all, but a matter of survival. This is not a modern phenomenon. In prehistory, the same dynamics played out endlessly, just without written records. A smaller tribe encounters a larger, expanding group. Through trade, intermarriage, or sheer force, they are absorbed. Their unique language, with all its intricacies, fades first from public life, then from the home, and finally from the memory of the last elder who spoke it. The death of a language is far more than the loss of words. It is the extinction of an entire worldview. Each language is a unique library, encoding generations of knowledge about local plants, animals, and weather patterns. It contains philosophical concepts with no direct translation, jokes that only make sense within its own logic, and ways of classifying the world that are utterly unique. When a language dies, that library burns to the ground. Every time a linguist records the last speaker of a language today, we are given a small, painful insight into the monumental silence of prehistory. We are witnessing, in miniature, the fate of the thousands upon thousands of languages that vanished without a single written word to remember them by. This profound sense of loss, this race against time, is what fuels the urgent development of new technological tools for recovery, a digital net cast to save the voices that still remain. We can now run simulations of the deep past. Computational linguists are building digital time machines, using vast statistical models to answer a question that was once pure speculation. How do you reconstruct a language that vanished 10,000 years ago? They begin with what we know, feeding mountains of data from documented language families into powerful algorithms. These programs are trained on the rules of linguistic change, how sounds systematically shift over centuries, how grammar simplifies or complexifies. Once the model understands these patterns, researchers can run it in reverse, tracing the branching paths of modern languages back to a hypothetical common ancestor. The result is not a single, definitive answer, but a landscape of probabilities. The model might suggest that a proto-language was most likely spoken around a certain time, and it can generate a list of words that its speakers probably used. This reveals something fascinating about human speech. Some words have incredible staying power. Terms for mother and father, often based on the simple, universal sounds made by infants like mama and papa, prove to be remarkably resilient, echoing across dozens of millennia. These digital simulations are a form of virtual archaeology, allowing us to test hypotheses about prehistory in a way that was unimaginable just a decade ago. They offer a glimpse, however hazy, into the very first chapters of the human story, and this high-tech approach is now converging with one of the oldest forms of human knowledge, the vocabulary we borrowed directly from the world around us. A language is a living map of the world its speakers inhabited. The words our ancestors chose to name and keep reveal the contours of their homeland, the animals they hunted, and the plants they gathered. This is the principle of linguistic paleontology, a method that treats a reconstructed vocabulary as a fossil record of an ancient environment. When we rebuild a proto-language, we are not just assembling a list of words, we are sketching a landscape. Take the case of Proto-Indo-European. Its reconstructed lexicon includes words for trees like the birch and the willow, and animals like the wolf, the bear, and crucially, the salmon. These are not random selections. They paint a very specific picture of a temperate, forested region in Eurasia, a place where these specific flora and fauna thrive. The presence of a word for salmon, a fish that migrates up freshwater rivers, is particularly telling. It strongly suggests a homeland within the range of the Atlantic salmon, effectively ruling out vast stretches of steppe or southern coastline. This logic works through absence as much as presence. If a proto-language has a rich vocabulary for different types of snow and ice, but lacks a basic word for ocean, the implication is clear. Its speakers were likely an inland people, their lives and their language shaped by a continental climate far from the sea. Their world was defined by the forest and the river, not the coastline. Each of these linguistic clues acts like a piece of environmental data, allowing us to triangulate the possible homeland of a people who left no written records of their own. We can then overlay this linguistic map with the one provided by archaeologists. Do the pollen samples from a specific region show evidence of birch forests? Do we find salmon bones in ancient hearth sites? When the words and the physical evidence align, the ghost of a proto-culture begins to take solid form. The language itself becomes a story of adaptation and survival, a narrative of a people learning to name the world around them, one tree, one animal, one season at a time. This deep environmental context is what breathes life into the skeletal structure of a reconstructed grammar, transforming abstract sounds into the lived experience of a forgotten people. This intimate connection between word and world leads us to a deeper question about the very nature of these ancient tongues. Were they simply tools for survival, or did they also carry the first echoes of something more, something we would recognize as a spiritual belief? A language is a living map of social bonds as much as it is of the physical world. The words our ancestors used to define their relationships reveal the architecture of their entire society. We can excavate this social world by focusing on one of its most fundamental building blocks, kinship terms. In many indigenous languages, the systems for naming relatives are astonishingly complex and precise. You do not just have a single word for uncle. You might have one word for your maternal uncle and a completely different one for your paternal uncle. This is not just a linguistic curiosity. It is a direct reflection of intricate social structures, inheritance rules, and marriage alliances that govern daily life. These terms tell us who was responsible for whom, who could marry whom, and how property and status flowed from one generation to the next. By reconstructing these kinship terms for a proto-language, we can infer whether a society was organized around large, extended clans or smaller, nuclear families. The vocabulary itself becomes a blueprint for their social world, but these ancient languages tell us more than just family ties. They reveal the entire spectrum of social hierarchy. The presence of a reconstructed word for a chieftain or a leader suggests a society with centralized authority and social stratification. If we find a word that clearly means slave or servant, it points to inequalities and power dynamics that were formalized in their culture. A rich vocabulary for trade and barter, with distinct words for buying, selling, and debt, reveals an economy based on reciprocal exchange and complex social obligations. This moves us far beyond simple survival. It shows us a world of negotiation, status, and law. Perhaps most profound of all is the evidence for their inner lives. When linguists can reconstruct words for abstract concepts like honor, spirit, or debt, we are granted a stunning window into their moral and cosmological universe. The existence of a word for debt implies a sophisticated concept of future obligation and social trust. A term for honor tells us they cared about reputation and standing within the community. Words for spiritual beings or an afterlife show that they pondered existential questions, that they had a mythology, a sense of the sacred. By analyzing these entire semantic fields, the interconnected webs of meaning within a proto-language, we can begin to reconstruct not just what these people ate or what tools they used, but what they valued, what they feared, and what they believed. This social and intellectual universe, however, was incredibly fragile. It lived and died with the memory of its speakers. Before writing, the only place to store this intricate web of knowledge was in the human mind. This immense reliance on memory shaped the very sound and structure of language itself, forcing it to become a tool not just for communication, but for perfect verbatim preservation across generations. Before writing, the longest story ever told was the one remembered by an entire people. In a world without written records, knowledge was not stored on shelves but in the living memory of the community. This was the domain of oral tradition, a vast and intricate system of stories, songs, and epic poems passed meticulously from one generation to the next. These were not casual tales. They were the sacred vessels of a culture's identity, encoding its laws, its history, and its understanding of the world. A single epic poem could function as a tribal encyclopedia, a moral guide, and a historical chronicle all at once. The rhythm and rhyme were not just artistic flourishes. They were essential mnemonic devices, the structural engineering that allowed immense amounts of information to be preserved verbatim across centuries. This was how a society remembered its past, by turning its most vital knowledge into an unforgettable song. While these narratives inevitably change, adapting to new circumstances and incorporating new details, scholars like Jan van Sina demonstrated that they often preserve a historical core with astonishing fidelity. They are not literal history books, but they are a profound form of long-term cultural memory. One of the most stunning examples comes from Aboriginal Australian communities. Their Dreamtime stories, passed down for over 7,000 years, contain detailed descriptions of specific coastal landscapes, including the locations of freshwater springs and the contours of river valleys. The incredible part is that these described coastlines have been underwater since the end of the last ice age. The stories remember a world that vanished beneath the rising seas millennia ago. This is not an isolated case. Myths from cultures across the globe seem to hold similar echoes of cataclysmic ancient events, from great floods to volcanic eruptions, preserved not as dry facts but as powerful, symbolic narratives. By analyzing the structure and shared themes of these myths, we can sometimes catch a glimpse of a real event that so traumatized a community it was woven into the very fabric of their identity. The oral record is our most direct, living link to the prehistoric mind. It allows us to hear, however faintly, the stories our ancestors felt were important enough to remember forever. The word for snow is not the same everywhere. For a skier in the Alps, it might be just snow, but for an Inuit elder, that single English word collapses a dozen distinct realities into one. There is the soft, deep snow for building shelters, the hard, wind-packed snow for travel, the snow that is perfect for melting into drinking water. Each type has its own name, its own identity, because in that environment, the distinction is a matter of life and death. This is the heart of the untranslatability problem. Every language is a unique filter for reality, and when one vanishes, its entire way of seeing the world vanishes with it. This is the ultimate barrier in our quest to decode prehistory. We can reconstruct a Proto-Indo-European word, and we can be reasonably confident it meant something like father or sky. But we can never know the silent echoes that word carried. Did it evoke a stern, distant patriarch or a beloved protector? Was the sky a cold, empty expanse or a living, breathing canopy of gods? The cultural and emotional resonance of that single syllable is gone forever. This is the ghost in the machine of linguistic reconstruction. We recover the skeleton of a language, its grammar and its core vocabulary, but the soul, the lived experience of its speakers often eludes us. This philosophical chasm is where our journey meets its most profound challenge. How do we cross from understanding what was said to understanding what was truly meant? The answer may lie not in the past, but in the very latest tools of the present, where artificial intelligence is learning to read between the lines of lost languages. Artificial intelligence is now teaching us how to read the silence. This digital toolkit represents our most radical departure from traditional methods, allowing us to process information on a scale the human mind simply cannot match. Machine learning algorithms are being deployed as tireless digital detectives, scanning through the thousands of undeciphered Indus Valley symbols. They are not looking for meaning in the way a human scholar would, but for hidden statistical fingerprints. They search for patterns in how often certain signs appear, in the sequences they form, and in their positions relative to carved images of animals. The goal is to answer a foundational question. Is this a true writing system encoding a spoken language, or is it a collection of proto-writing like heraldic symbols or maker's marks? Finding a statistical structure that resembles known languages would be a monumental first step, a sign that we are indeed looking at a script waiting to be heard. Beyond decipherment, other AI projects are attempting to simulate the very flow of time. These systems can model thousands of possible sound change rules simultaneously, testing entire evolutionary pathways for language families. They take the known data from hundreds of modern and historical languages and run countless simulations, searching for the most probable sequence of shifts that could have produced the diversity we see today. It is like rewinding a tangled ball of yarn through a digital loom to see how the original thread might have looked. This allows linguists to stress-test their theories about proto-languages with a rigor that was previously impossible. Perhaps the most speculative yet fascinating application involves listening to the past in a new way. Some researchers are using AI to analyze the acoustic properties of ancient artifacts. Could a carefully crafted ritual drum or a specific type of pottery flute have been designed to produce a sound that mirrored a sacred word or a name for a deity? By modeling the soundscapes of ancient sites, we might uncover a layer of meaning that has been silent for millennia. This entire digital arsenal offers a thrilling promise that we might finally break codes that have resisted human ingenuity for generations. Yet this power comes with profound responsibility. Who has the right to digitally reconstruct and speak the sacred words of a culture that has been silenced? If we can resurrect a lost language, do we also have an obligation to the descendants of its people? The quest to hear the past is forcing us to confront the ethics of listening. This question of who has the right to speak for the past brings us to a profound and necessary ethical crossroads. The power to digitally resurrect a lost language is not a neutral act. When a research team reconstructs a proto-language spoken by the ancestors of a modern indigenous group, a vital question emerges: who does this rediscovered voice truly belong to? For centuries, the study of ancient cultures was often an extractive industry. Archaeologists would remove artifacts, linguists would record the last speakers of a language, and all the knowledge would be published in academic journals far removed from the communities it came from. The descendants were treated as subjects of study, not as partners and heirs to that cultural legacy. Today, that model is rightly being overturned. The emerging ethical framework insists that this research must be collaborative. It means that before a single digital simulation is run, researchers have a responsibility to engage with descendant communities. This is not about asking for permission after the fact. It is about building relationships from the very beginning, ensuring that the research questions themselves are shaped by the people whose history is being investigated. The goal shifts from simply extracting data to fostering a shared journey of discovery. The knowledge gained should not just fill a footnote in a textbook. It should be a tool that benefits and empowers the living community. A reconstructed vocabulary can help revitalize a language that is on the brink of extinction. It can provide a deeper historical context for oral traditions, strengthening cultural identity and pride. For a community whose history was systematically erased by colonization, this is not just academic. It is an act of reclamation and healing. Our responsibility does not end with ancient languages. It extends directly to the fragile linguistic diversity we still have today. Every effort to document a critically endangered language, to create dictionaries and teaching materials in partnership with its last fluent speakers, is a direct defiance of the great silence that swallowed prehistory. We are making a choice. We are deciding that this library will not burn. The quest to decode the voices before writing is ultimately a human one. It challenges us to listen not only to the whispers from the dust, but to the living voices beside us, ensuring that the story of humanity remains a chorus, not a monologue. A quiet extinction is unfolding in real time, and its scale is almost incomprehensible. Of the over 7,000 languages spoken on Earth today, nearly half are now considered endangered, at risk of vanishing completely within the next few decades. This is not a slow, natural process. It is a rapid collapse, a direct echo of the prehistoric silences we are desperately trying to understand. When the last fluent speaker of a language dies, it is not just a personal tragedy. It is the closing of a unique window into the human mind, the burning of a library filled with knowledge we have not yet even learned to read. This modern crisis has launched linguists into a global race against time, a salvage operation of monumental importance. Their mission is to document these fragile languages with an urgency once reserved for saving a species from the brink. But this work goes far beyond creating a simple dictionary or a grammar book. The true goal is to capture the living breath of the language. Researchers spend years in communities recording elders as they tell ancient stories, negotiate a dispute, or explain the medicinal use of a rare plant. They document songs sung at weddings, jokes shared among friends, and the subtle instructions given from a grandparent to a child on how to weave a basket. These everyday conversations are the real treasure. They show us how the language actually works in its natural habitat, how its grammar shapes thought, and how its vocabulary maps a unique reality. Each one of these documented languages becomes a crucial data point. It expands our understanding of the full spectrum of what human language can be, revealing possibilities that our own languages might have forgotten. A newly recorded tongue from the Amazon might use a grammatical structure completely unknown to European languages, forcing us to rethink the very foundations of logic and time. A language from the Himalayas might have a sound system that challenges every assumption we had about the limits of the human voice. This modern documentation is the raw material for our journey into the deep past. Every language we save today provides another piece for the grand puzzle of Reconstruction. It gives our computational models more data to learn from, and it offers living proof of linguistic features we once thought were impossible. The fight to preserve the voices of the present is not separate from the quest to hear the voices of the past. They are the very same struggle. By saving these living languages from silence, we are ultimately saving our own history, ensuring that the human story remains a chorus of countless unique voices, not a single lonely song. This search for lost voices is quietly overturning our oldest historical narratives. For centuries, our understanding of prehistory was shaped almost entirely by archaeology and the written records of a handful of powerful, literate societies. Think of the famous cradles of civilization: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley. Their stories, carved in stone and clay, have dominated our textbooks. But this perspective is profoundly biased. It is the history of the winners, the ones who left behind libraries. It creates a world where only the literate are considered truly civilized, while everyone else is relegated to the shadows, labeled as primitive or barbaric. Prehistoric linguistics shatters this illusion. By reconstructing the languages of peoples who never wrote a single word, we are discovering a far more intricate and interconnected human story. The spread of the Indo-European languages, for example, was not a story of a single, superior culture conquering silent savages. It was a complex, millennia-long process of migration, trade, intermarriage, and cultural fusion. The linguistic evidence shows borrowing and exchange, proving that these so-called primitive peoples were engaged in a continuous, sophisticated dialogue across vast distances. Their languages were not simple. A reconstructed proto-language often reveals a grammar of stunning complexity, capable of expressing abstract thought, moral nuance, and poetic metaphor. These were people with rich intellectual and spiritual lives who debated philosophy, composed epic poetry, and passed down intricate knowledge of the stars, all through the power of the spoken word alone. This field is fundamentally democratic. It gives a voice back to the hunter-gatherers, the pastoralists, the countless small tribes who formed the overwhelming majority of humanity for tens of thousands of years. They were the ones who truly built our world, exploring every continent, developing the technologies of agriculture and tool-making, and forging the social bonds that make us human. Their story is the main event of human history, not a prelude. This forces us to see prehistory not as a dark, silent age waiting for the invention of writing to begin, but as a vibrant, noisy, and intellectually sophisticated era in its own right. So where do we go from here? The most promising research lies at the convergence of all these threads. We are combining ancient DNA analysis with linguistic maps and archaeological data in ways that were impossible just a decade ago. We are using supercomputers to model not just one language family, but the interactions between multiple families across whole continents. The next great discovery might not be a single word, but a pattern, a hidden signal of contact between two groups we never knew met. It is a future where the silence of the past is not a wall, but a curtain we are finally learning to part. The ultimate goal is no longer to follow a single thread, but to weave an entire tapestry. This new era of discovery is defined by its collaborative spirit, a fusion of fields that were once isolated. Geneticists, archaeologists, and computational linguists are now working in concert, their separate streams of evidence merging into a single, powerful river of understanding. Projects are already underway that sequence ancient DNA from Paleolithic remains, and then cross-reference that genetic data with the branching patterns of language families. Imagine finding the bones of a person who lived 15,000 years ago in the Caucasus, and through their genes, being able to connect them not just to a population, but to a specific linguistic tradition whose echoes we can still hear today. This is the power of convergence. Another frontier is emerging from the study of the mind itself, in a field called neuroarchaeology. Here, researchers are not just looking at the shape of a stone tool, but at the cognitive demands required to make it. They study how the brain evolved to manage the complex, sequential actions of flint knapping, a process that shares deep neural pathways with the intricate syntax of language. The leap from a simple Oldowan chopper to a symmetrical Acheulean hand axe may represent a cognitive milestone, a moment when the brain's capacity for hierarchical planning and abstract thought expanded, creating the perfect conditions for complex grammar to emerge. The objective is to build a dynamic, multi-layered map of human prehistory. On this map, you could watch a genetic lineage migrate out of Africa, see their distinctive toolkit appear in the archaeological record of the Levant, and then hear the first reconstructed words of their proto-language, all telling different parts of the same story. This is no longer just about finding what was lost. It is about understanding the journey itself, the forces that shaped our minds, our societies, and our very ability to say we. The final and most profound mystery is what this complete story will ultimately reveal about who we are. That silence holds more than forgotten words. It holds the weight of entire human experiences. We must contemplate the sheer volume of what has vanished, the epic poems recited around campfires for generations, the complex legal systems negotiated without a single written law, the love songs that made hearts soar, and the jokes that brought laughter to people whose faces we can never picture. This is not just a list of lost artifacts. It is a void filled with the intellectual and emotional lives of our ancestors, 100 millennia of human creativity and connection, now utterly silent. Confronting this reality is a profoundly humbling experience. The historian Daniel Lord Smale calls this feeling a sense of deep history, a visceral understanding that our own brief lives are just the latest link in an almost endless chain. This quest to hear the lost voices is far more than an academic hobby. It touches on a fundamental human desire, a deep-seated need to know where we come from and to feel a connection to those who came before us. We are storytelling creatures, and the largest part of our own story is missing. That silence is a vacuum we are instinctively driven to fill with understanding. Recognizing this inner drive helps us appreciate why this search is so compelling. It is not just for scholars in dusty archives. It matters to anyone who has ever looked at the stars and wondered about their place in the vast sweep of time. This reflection on our shared human curiosity naturally leads us to a crucial question. What is the practical value of all this ancient knowledge? Why should we care about the words of people who lived 10,000 years ago? The answer is that this is not merely about the past. It is about arming ourselves with a deeper, more resilient understanding of humanity itself. By studying the incredible diversity of past languages and the social structures they encoded, we gain a vital perspective on our own modern world. We see that our way of life, our concepts of family, property, and even time are not the only ways to be human. They are just one set of possibilities among countless others that have flourished and faded. This knowledge is a powerful antidote to the arrogant idea that our modern, globalized civilization represents the peak of human development. It teaches us humility and resilience, showing us the vast range of human adaptation and the enduring strength of the human spirit across unimaginable challenges. This ancient wisdom, recovered word by reconstructed word, provides a toolkit for navigating our own future. It reminds us that collapse and rebirth are part of our story, that languages can die but can also be revitalized, and that the greatest human skill is our capacity to adapt, to learn, and to tell our story anew. The very algorithms designed to rewind language through time are now accelerating our future. Those complex statistical models, trained to understand how words shift and grammars transform over centuries, have become the engine behind the speech recognition in your phone and the real-time translation app on your computer. By studying the natural, organic evolution of human communication, computer scientists have taught machines to parse our messy, ever-changing dialects, making technology more intuitive and accessible across the globe. This is a perfect example of blue sky research yielding profoundly practical tools, all because we wanted to listen to a conversation that ended 10,000 years ago. The same deep understanding of linguistic change is also revolutionizing the fight to save the world's endangered languages. We are no longer just making recordings for an archive. We are creating living revitalization programs. Linguists now use these evolutionary principles to predict how a dormant language might naturally grow if it was spoken again, helping communities develop new words for modern concepts like the internet or climate change in a way that feels authentic to their linguistic roots. This is not a sterile academic exercise. For many indigenous communities, the reconstruction of a proto-language is an act of reclamation. When a people can trace their ancestral tongue back to a specific root, to a word for home spoken by their distant forebears, it mends a historical rupture. It provides a tangible connection to an identity that colonization sought to erase, transforming a story of loss into one of resilience and return. The voices of the deep past are not ghosts. They are active participants in our modern world, shaping technology, healing cultural wounds, and reminding us that our story is far older and more interconnected than we often realize. This grand quest to decode prehistory is more than a collection of facts. It is a fundamental shift in perspective, a new way of seeing ourselves in the vast flow of time. We are not the first people to ask who we are simply the latest to listen for the answer. Our journey through these lost voices ends with a humbling realization. We have traveled from the first sparks of symbolic thought to the digital algorithms now resurrecting them, and along the way we have uncovered a truth far grander than any single discovery. The story of humanity is not written solely in clay and stone, but in the very air our ancestors breathed, in the countless conversations that built their world. We have seen how the silent evidence of a stone tool, the genetic map of a migration, and the reconstructed word for wheel can intertwine to tell a single, powerful story of human ingenuity. This quest proves that history is not a short record beginning with Sumerian scribes, but a vast, vibrant epic told in 10,000 different tongues. While we will never share a fireside chat with a Paleolithic storyteller, we are learning to hear their legacy in the echoes they left behind. Every language that ever existed, from the most widely spoken to the one that faded with its last elder, was a unique masterpiece. It was a complete and complex system for understanding the universe, a library of human experience. The work of decoding is far from over. With every new connection made between genetics and grammar, with every pattern and artificial intelligence uncovers in an undeciphered script, we recover more than just ancient vocabulary. We recover a piece of our collective soul, a reminder of the incredible diversity and resilience that defines us. What forgotten story do you hope we might one day hear? Share your thoughts on these ancient mysteries in the comments below.